For those of you that don't know me, my name is Joanne Cortese. I'm one of the most recent additions to the Hong Kong Gallery Association, looking after special projects and events. I'm also the director of Axel Vervoort Gallery here in Hong Kong. Our next speaker, I'm not sure how much of an introduction he needs. Unfortunately, he's unable to be with us himself in person, but he's generously agreed to share his thoughts on why art is important to society. As a writer, an art collector, and entrepreneur, he was born in Hong Kong and educated locally and in Britain. In 1983, he lived in China and taught in Peking University. He's worked in oil exploration in offshore China and gold mining in Africa and Australia. He founded Shanghai Tang and the China Club. In London, he's been a trustee for over 21 years of the Royal Academy of Arts, chairman of the Tate's Asia Pacific Acquisition Committee, and advisor to the London Symphony Orchestra. In Hong Kong, he was the founding chairman of the Hong Kong Cancer Fund and the Down Syndrome Association, and a patron of the Geographical Society in Hong Kong and the Youth Arts Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Sir David Tang.
Why does art matter? Is this a serious question? Who is asking this question? Are you all gathered together today in the Hong Kong Art Week Symposium seriously asking this question? In the Miller Theatre, whose benefactor is a real art connoisseur and collector, and in the Asia Society, a pillar of Asian cultural forums with an extensive network all over the world. Does any of you here have the slightest amoebic skepticism about why art matters? Well, if any of you does question that art matters, then I suggest you shouldn't be here, or that you're a moron, an imbecile, or a nincompoop, or an idiot. I can understand that there may be quite a lot of them if I was speaking at the new and soulless government complex in Wan Chai, for so many politicians and civil servants at best pay lip service to the proposition that art matters, and at worst, the vast majority of them are ignoramuses and really do not have the faintest idea why art matters, and more importantly, how a society could benefit from art. Little wonder then that after 18 years, the West Kowloon Cultural District project, led by a civil servant who has 32 years of experience but in housing and property and transport, remains one of the oldest fetuses in art procreation and still in danger of being stillborn. And little wonder that even with the Art Basel Hong Kong, the government does not seem to appreciate its importance by making a proper fuss of it, because it is precisely the kind of event that brings a proper international dimension to our territory. I personally tried to persuade the chief executive to attend this event when it first happened. To his credit, he did come twice and even officiated at an opening. But on these occasions, he seemed disinterested in the art and almost wanted to hot foot out of the convention center as if he was desperate for the loo. Even more curiously, when he cut the ribbon one year, he cordoned off all the VIP guests and refused their photographs taken with them, as if he was ashamed of being identified with the art event and be seen, God forbid, with those of us who are passionate about art. My point is clear and simple. All of you sitting here have not a scintilla of doubt that art matters in society, and particularly in Hong Kong, which has managed to become a very prosperous and vibrant community with an outstanding accumulation of wealth and much energy and enterprise to achieve what 90% of the other places on earth can only dream about achieving. When building a cultural centre, which community gets an immediate pledge of US dollars 3 billion. So it becomes more of a joke, more of a ridicule, more of an embarrassment and a bitter disappointment that the West Kowloon project moves along like a geriatric snail, which incidentally has no legs, but merely slides along on his fat foot. There is another extraordinary aspect why art should particularly flourish in a place like Hong Kong, which for 150 years has had an harmonious yet exciting juxtaposition of the Orient and the Occident, with a diversity of people living together, throwing up endless artistic opportunities of cross-culture and fertilization. Even after 1997, Hong Kong remains a juxtaposed society between the mainlanders and the locals, who are still very different, with nearly 50 million visitors from China last year swamping through 7 million local inhabitants. Yet, there is no leading politician or civil servant in Hong Kong who is genuinely passionate about art. There is no one in our leadership who shouts about the importance of art, that it matters a lot. The fact is that if you wish to peddle art in a society like Hong Kong, you need to have a group of influential and enthusiastic political leaders pushing art day in and day out, preferably shouting on top of Lion Rock every sunrise and sunset with a megaphone extolling the virtue of art. Instead, all we hear is a vacuum of hollow silence relegated to the darkest penumbra of the gigantic scaffoldings that pervade our territory and which have come to symbolize the affluence and greed of Hong Kong, with our government in open complicit support. Thankfully, Hong Kong is not going to die without the West Kowloon project, but the prospect of this project that is supposed to be a beacon for excellent art and culture in ending up as a second or third-rate centre is a deathly thought. It becomes even more depressing when we realise that there is now, before any building has gone up, the requirement of a shortfall of money, a lot more money, perhaps twice as much as before, with the new constitution of our Legislative Council, which hardly augurs well for the approval of such excessive amounts. But we must not give up. If there were idiots in the government and the civil service who do not appreciate the value of art or are not prepared to fight for it, then we who know must tell them why, and tell them why loudly and incessantly, that art is an essential ingredient in any community. At the height of the Second World War, Churchill was asked if the British government ought to cut its subsidies for the art in order to give priorities to the military in fighting the war. He replied, "Then what are we fighting for?" Maybe this quote ought to be taught to every politician and civil servant in Hong Kong. The simple truth is that art is imagination, and imagination is art. Without imagination, there is no art. Without art, there is no imagination. Each of us is not just a body. Each of us is a body and soul. Our bodies require physical nourishment, but our souls require spiritual nourishment. That spiritual nourishment comes from the roots of our imagination. The artists are the ones who use their imagination to grow their acorns of thoughts into sturdy oak trees, some of which last standing for hundreds or even thousands of years. These longevities are possible because the land of the imagination is infinitely fertile, and good crops and shrubs and flowers last forever in these fields of dreams. Artists make dreams their realities, not only for themselves, but for all of us. Those who just dream dreams and regard them as mere nocturnal interruptions in our slumber are fast asleep without real consciousness. That's why we should despise those somnambulance, walking around without care or curiosity, of creating dreams into realities. From now on, when you meet someone who has never thought about doing anything about their dreams, you should wake them up and tell them to articulate their dreams into realities. If they don't speak to them again. And if they turn out to be a politician or civil servant, shout shame on them because they are in dereliction of their duties for not nourishing the soul, the spiritual core of our population. After all, without enthusiasm, nothing is achieved. If our government is indeed led by a giant bunch of somnambulants, then we have a right to demand for their waking up. There is not a tiny corner in the world in which art does not enrich the place and its people. From the depths of cannibals in Papua New Guinea, to the favela people in Brazil, to the Eskimos in Alaska, to the dwellers in skyscrapers of Manhattan, or the bourgeoisie across boulevards in Paris, there is art with which to enhance lives. All of us are born with eyes and ears and mouths. They enable us to see and to hear and to speak. They're not there just to demonstrate the ingenuity of our physical constitution, miraculous though they are. They're there to absorb and digest, and also to creating marvelous visual sights, wonderful music and sounds, and beautiful words of prose and poetry. That's why millions and billions of us derive enjoyment and satisfaction, an inexplicable frisson of excitement when we are confronted by works from the likes of Botticelli, or Leonardo da Vinci, or Michelangelo, or Caravaggio, or Picasso, or Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, or Dante, or Shakespeare, or Chiang Kai-shek, or Li Bai. These and hundreds and thousands of other artists continue to enrich endless generations of admirers. That's why when we come to tyrannies which bar us from seeing and hearing and speaking, that becomes the death knell of art and an insidious crime. And when we do not use our eyes and ears and mouths, when we're able to do so totally and utterly free in a place like Hong Kong, it becomes a double crime. How dare of anyone even to contemplate, questioning the value of art and asking if it matters. Not even a mew, I believe, would ask it. Yet human mews might, and I seem to see a lot of them in Wan Chai, and they need to be put out to pasture. Is the thing in there?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, Katie, you asked me to answer some questions, and there are four. This is from the artist Casey Wong. He asked, what kind of role contemporary visual art could play in the age of political absurdity? And I think the second question is more or less the same one. How effective can contemporary visual art be a critic of political matters? Well, of course, art can comment on politics, and it happens all the time. Just look at our revolutionary evolution of Chinese contemporary art starting in 1989. I can think of very easily the example of Wang Guangyi, who has this tremendous series of art about the Cultural Revolution, but juxtaposed with modern brands like Coca-Cola or Nike. And it is really a commentary of how, I suppose, modern China has evolved from a communist state with all the hang-ups of the Cultural Revolution into a capitalistic society extolling the virtue of money and profit. And so it becomes more or less a cartoon in the sense that is a commentary on politics. So, of course it happens, and I can think of Guernica, for example, where Picasso represented the horror of the Spanish Civil War, and that is, for me, an extraordinary painting of passion and pathos. And so, you know, it is another commentary from an artist's point of view about the horrors of war and how unfair it is and how it should not have happened. And it happens all the time. So you're asking a question which has got so many millions of examples, it becomes a truism. Now, there is another question, I gather, two other questions. It says, should art be provocative to engage audiences? Well, I mean, art doesn't need to aim to be provocative, although good art usually is. That's how, in art, something that has never been done before is looked at in a different light. And when it becomes provocative, it becomes more valuable in the sense that it defines a different kind of development in art. So if you think about the great movements in Western art, Expressionism, and how it changes the way in which we look at art, and using our minds and having to understand the concepts behind the artist's ideas. These are all kinds of ways in which an artist can express themselves. And as I said, it doesn't have to be provocative, but some of the most seminal artists have used provocative works to define certain explicit moments in the movement of art that makes it rather special. When you have done something that nobody else has done before, that's valuable. But it's not a necessary condition, and it's not a sufficient condition either. And the last question is, are artists the last eccentrics? Well, I don't know. I mean, you don't have to be an eccentric. People always think that some artists are weird, they dress differently, they have longer hair, but there are people with long hair, like one of our politicians, who are not an artist at all. I don't really care whether artists are eccentrics or not. What I care is what they produce. And if it is eccentric art that they produce, they need to have a permanent role in the history of the development of art in order to survive. And so we can always judge when a good piece of art would last, because it always a matter of the test being tested with a test of time. Anyway, these are not very interesting questions, by the way. I wish that I had more challenging questions. They're rather boring, I'm afraid, but there it is. I've done my duty in answering them, possibly in a boring way as well.
Unfortunately, we can't now raise the bar and throw very interesting questions at Sir David. Can we just take a very short break, and then we will be back for the next segment. Thank you.